In this series of Sustainability of Fashion, we'll be exploring fashion's precarious relationship with sustainability and its attempts to address growing concerns surrounding its non-conservational approaches to society and environment. Thank you all for tuning in to the 4th episode in our sustainability series. Joining us today we have
Nazina,
Kate,
Samia,
Apranji,
and myself, Ashwini. In this episode, we're going to speak about the prize of sustainability or of non-sustainable practices and ways in which businesses can approach sustainability. What do you think is the real price that both businesses and consumers pay for these products?
Yeah, well, it's something that Kate was sort of talking about just before we sort of started, which was the human cost that's associated with unsustainable practices. In absence of, factual, information, you can sort of tell just by a lot of the news reports that we're just hearing at the moment where people are suffering as a result of non-sustainable, working environments or non-sustainable pressures that have been adopted by these manufacturers whose only real goal or focus is to make a profit margin, a substantial profit margin.
Yeah, I guess we're talking about like the ethical costs of fashion, not just the like financial implications of non-sustainability. Yeah, generally I think the ethical cost is high. You're not talking, people are worried about putting £1 or £2 on a garment that people are not going to buy it. On the other hand, if you've got a system that's damaging the environment, then that's costing everybody.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you are, we talked about before the Rana Plaza building collapse, factory collapse in Bangladesh. I mean, that's
incredible.
If you look at the numbers of people who were killed, there's an actual number.
There's actually put a price to their lives.
1,500 people died.
1,500.
And a lot more were injured as well.
Yeah. And you just, and also, the wider implications of that on families and relatives and the community in general. And that was really only came to people's attention because of the large scale of and the amount of lives that were lost. But it's not the first one to have happened. It won't be the last one.
It won't be the last either, yeah.
And if you talk that, there is human lives have been given a price.
Yeah.
So
they're seen as commodities as well, as you were sort of talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. The whatever animals are used, whatever habitats are destroyed, whatever, and the human beings involved, all of it is just a commodity to make money.
Yeah.
And the sooner you move away from that, I mean, there's no positive other than financial gain to be made there. There's no other positives to approaching a business like that. So the sooner you get away from that, the better. I think the sustainable model hasn't come through because ultimately, initially, certainly it is going to affect profits.
Profit margins, yeah.
It is going to add cost, potentially, that's going to hit the consumer.
Yeah.
Which is ultimately going to hit the business, and that's that's an unattractive proposition.
Well, it's not going to give the incentive for the consumer to have a sustainable consciousness.
No, and there's no incentive for the business to promote that to the consumer and educate them anymore in it, or offer them alternatives, or do a complete overhaul of the entire industry. But then, if you think about the fact that you're relying on resources that are finite, and there is a potential for legislation that is going to have to be brought in on industry
and govern much
surely
stricter.
Reacting too late to it.
Yeah.
If you took a longer term view, surely it would be better to start incrementally implementing these things, or having the cost of actually not doing it until you absolutely have to do it. Surely that's going to be a lot higher. While they've still got a bit of control over what they do and how they manage things, it would be better in the short term to start working on it properly.
Can I just ask, actually, who are the clients of the manufacturer in Bangladesh?
I think it was H&M, Zara, and high street retailers.
Mainstream high street retailers.
Yeah.
And what were their responses do they have documented
In
responses?
fact, the
really
people who were directly held in charge, who were in charge of the building and the safety of the building and were associated with these brands, just ran away. There was an arrest or warrant against them and they've just gone into hiding. And since then, I don't know whether they've been found or not, but at least for a long time, I know that they just escaped, really.
Right.
So,
And
because they're the big people with the money and they
Yeah.
got away with it. So.
And the retailers, what's their response to it?
I don't think they had much to say about it because there wasn't anything out there from their side. They must have compensated it in some way or the other, but I
or
don't.
just hushed it up pretty
Yeah.
much. Just hushed it up.
Because I think, introducing the concept of transparency, that there's this sort of like a new buzzword of blockchain and creating, transparency at every single stage, throughout the sort of supply chain process. That would be very useful in this particular scenario, because if you knew that your item was a direct consequence of that tragedy, as a consumer, you have that choice. The power is, within within you to be able to decide on whether you want to purchase that product and maybe just, kind of contribute towards it being acceptable, for that to occur, because it will happen again. So, there are certain things that I think, us as consumers need to be made very aware of, but we're not. So a lot of these horrors are sort of brushed underneath the carpet and sort of taken away from the public domain as much as possible, so these retailers can still remain bastions of whatever sustainable consciousness type programs that they've got going on, when really actually where all the dirt has been done, they've been very savvy in concealing while still selling you those products. But yeah,
That's the sad part, that people still haven't stopped consuming from these high street brands even after such a huge disaster has taken place.
That's
Like
interesting.
they haven't stopped consuming from. Like you'd expect them to, have some sort of a reaction to it.
Yeah.
Well,
They haven't
like we
really.
discussed, it is hard because
Yeah.
you need an alternative, and if the alternative doesn't necessarily exist, or if it's not strong enough, if it's not convenient enough, then people will easily just give in to.
And if you've got multiple brands using those suppliers, are you actually
Yeah.
going to find
Yeah.
an alternative
Exactly.
that doesn't have, maybe if not that particular place, but that they're not doing it somewhere else? And I think it's easy for probably some of these brands to not react too much because it's a subsidiary, it's someone,
That's true.
but then they
There's a
chose them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they are responsible
Yeah.
because they chose that supplier
Yeah.
and they should have, checked,
Yeah.
done a bit of due diligence and made sure it was okay, but they didn't. So they can't just wash their hands of something like that because it wasn't them directly doing it,
It's very similar to this dissertation that I wrote many yonks ago, but it was about the sort of employment laws that were being violated by subcontractors who were manufacturing footwear for New Balance, Adidas, I think Nike, basically the sort of sports or the footwear brands. And, those big brands knew exactly what these subcontractors were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew, all the sorts of atrocities that were happening within the sort of practices. But they chose to do nothing. They chose to just take a blind eye.
I think because they feel
ignore
they're
it.
far enough removed from it that it's not going to affect their public perception.
I think it's easier
much.
for people to ignore than to deal with the issue at hand.
Yeah, which I find really astonishing. So I think having some sort of legislation, we definitely need regulation involved, but having some sort of unified legislation that kind of it goes across all borders is useful, particularly in this scenario, and it does sort of bring home the real cost, not necessarily financial, but the sort of social and ethical cost of these non-sustainable practices, basically, affecting,
including like the water we drink, the air we breathe.
yeah,
affected, so.
everything.
Which actually brings us to the next question. Why is it unprofitable or undesirable for businesses and brands to adopt a more sustainable approach? I guess just because it's not economically profitable necessarily for them. So I guess
Because,
Capitalism.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's evil.
So they just don't
Because you're
care.
going to have to pay, that means paying a fair wage and that means investing in, changing your infrastructure and not using the factory that can quote the cheapest, but the one that's the most ethical, or the one that isn't cutting
buying
corners.
organic cotton and things.
Yeah, and all the things like that. And I think when you've got bottom lines involved, yeah, I mean, even though that is a really like short-termist attitude and probably won't actually serve you profitability in the long term, but while it's a model that makes money, people are going to stick to it rather than bite the bullet and
I think
be prepared to invest
in
making a big change without having their arms twisted.
Well, I do think it's a bit of an illusion to sort of expect companies to do the right thing when their efforts are more concentrated in making money, because again, within the sort of capitalist paradigm, exactly that's the whole point. Like stagnation and non-growth, they're things that are undesirable. What's desirable for businesses is to grow. Part of growth is increasing consumption. So in a world like fashion, for example, where consumption is heightened, there's no incentive really out there for a business to want to try and curb that or stop it or slow it. Do you know what I mean? So, are we sort of like in this illusion when we think, well, companies can actually take the high ground? Maybe not.
They can. I think they just don't want to.
They don't want to.
Yeah, but in what ways could businesses possibly adopt a more sustainable approach, and in such a way that it's profitable to them? Because there's so many ways you can go about sustainability, and some might have bigger impacts with a lower sort of for it to be easier for businesses to envisage rather than bigger things that might not cause as much of a change.
Well, there definitely needs to be incentives for it, which we've discussed. But I think I remember, Samia, you were talking about incentives as well for businesses. If going in previous episodes where you've mentioned actually, make it an incentive for a business to be socially aware.
I mean, they can make it for themselves because they can build a reputation and create almost a relationship with the consumer. About how sustainable they are, and it will, I don't know, making a trustworthy business and showing like their sustainable side to it can just no.
And do you know what that's called? Apparently, ethical capitalism. Yes, that's right. There's a word out there for it. I researched it. Ethical capitalism, which is just basically a business model, as you've just mentioned, but with a purpose, with a higher purpose, and with much more of a drive than profit. So it's really to the better good of society. And I do think that is, and it talks about the benefits as well, which are far more long-lasting, minimises operating costs through energy efficiency, reduces waste, improves employee retention rates, and basically there's a real sort of like marketing effort towards this particular paradigm, this alternative paradigm, which is far more socially aware. But the point is that it's not just a be all and end all. There are alternatives and better alternatives for business to adopt, practices that are far more socially aware and more sustainable. It's just whether they want to, and definitely profit kind of needs to be further down the priority list. So we just need to change.
They could just see sustainability as a positive thing and use that to their benefit, because I do believe like if you take design decisions in a way that you spend less but you
consider sustainability when you're really like in the initial process of design, then
choosing the manufacturing process, choosing the right materials.
Yeah, well, 80% of garments impact is derived from the design stage.
Yeah,
and I think there are a lot of small brands, independent labels who are really going like great guns to they've got a vision for this, they want to make it happen. It's what they believe in, and they're bringing some really good products to market. So it's perfectly doable. Like if these guys can do it with a lot less capital behind them, they can do it. And they are actually, maybe it's they're not millionaires yet and they're not floating their businesses on the stock market, but they are having success, and they are doing well, and they are like continuing to build. So if the sort of the big guns can just scale that up,
Yeah.
surely it is actually doable. There might be an initial little bit of pain when you're investing in something like this, but I mean, they're bound to have ways and means of offsetting that in some way.
Yeah.
I've got a good example for what Kate just said. There's this a designer in New York. I think he's Brooklyn based. His label, I think it's called Zero Waste Daniel, and he basically uses all of his products. They're basically done in house by his group of designers, and they use all the excess waste from basically cutting room waste or scraps. They go around collecting scraps from fabric stores, and then they make products out of those. So they cut those fabrics, they try to include them in the design, and they come up with really unique, one-off, very, very well done products. So and he's gaining popularity because of that, because that is very sustainable what he's doing, and people are actually quite attracted to that. Even his workroom in his showroom in Brooklyn, it's all it's on the street, but the windows, it's completely like it has this transparency windows.
Okay.
So people can actually see what they're doing. So they're also
Right.
including people and attracting them and getting them into the whole process of, oh, look how this is how it's done.
like complete transparency.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's a little bit like food as well. I think there's a real trend towards sort of investing in businesses that make use or are able to sort of create I don't know, business models out of waste food. I don't know where there is one particularly based in London, but it's just a group of guys that have just come up with the concept, and it's doing really well. It's actually, they're able to provide very sort of cheap meals from, you know, the discarded, you know, bits and pieces from different, all the things that
Actually,
you know.
some food just looks ugly. So
so they
they're-
turn it
yeah, like I think
into meals.
Morrison's have
The
taken
wonky
that.
veg.
Yeah,
wonky veg.
and they just food that looks ugly is just being sold as cheaper foods.
That's
The
interesting.
rebranding of ugly food to wonky veg
That's
is
so
to use up the whole
interesting.
crop.
Well,
Yeah.
but you know what? What's so interesting though? Sorry, it's off topic a little bit. I have a allotment, and I grow veg, and veg just doesn't, or fruit, it doesn't necessarily look pretty. What's your vision of pretty looking veg
The
and
supermarket.
fruits?
The supermarkets want like
Really
symmetrical,
nice looking, yeah.
shiny.
And apples and
Or, like,
stuff, like they
healthy
cover them
foods.
with wax to make them look really shiny. And if there's something with like a small dent on it, even if 90% of the apple is good, they can't really sell it most of the time.
That's just crazy. And it's so true. It's down to psychology as well, particularly during the buying process. But Whole Foods, I know that with Whole Foods, a lot of people label it, particularly within their fruit and veg section, as like food porn, because you go in and everything's sort of like stacked in a way where it just looks like you just want you just want everything. You're like kind of engulfing yourself in this world of fruit and veg because just everything looks just so aesthetically beautiful. And I just think it just I don't
Nature isn't
Yeah,
beautiful.
and yet
That's
nature
fine.
isn't. Well, I mean, it depends on what you
Depends
class
what-
as beautiful.
I think that's the thing.
That's
It'd be
so
interesting to know
weird.
how much of that is driven by the consumer aesthetic, what consumers want,
Yeah.
and actually what big business think the consumers want,
think
and
it's
we've
both.
just then got used to.
Yeah, I think it's
So
both.
it's what we expect, but actually we were probably all right with it,
Yeah.
how it was before.
Do you know what I think? I think what first came was probably our perception of the appearance of the fruit and veg, or you know, the item, and then just retailers kind of jumping on that and
just going
and just
completely over the
right, exactly. So, you know, even though maybe the sort of idea, or you know, the concept was born from our perception initially, it's then kind of, you know, blown completely out of proportion by the retailer, by the big business, you know, the big
Yeah.
businesses that kind of run the industry.
But then if you're getting these kind of like, oh, we just repackage ugly food
yeah,
as wonky and make it like cute and
yeah,
a bit,
yeah, yeah,
and a bit funny, well then there's, you know, advertising has got a massive way to go in
time.
actually promoting the sustainability thing.
Yeah.
Start remarketing stuff
Yeah.
that isn't, as quite as glamorous as perhaps people don't think that sort of sustainable. Perhaps people have got an idea of everything's going to be like t-shirts knitted out of wheat and stuff. And kind of eco tag that got put on things a few years ago that isn't sexy and glamorous. But the fashion industry especially, with all the marketing and advertising tools and the ways of reworking things and
it's so true.
selling stuff to people, they've got to be able to, if they wanted to, they can sell this to people on an epic scale if they wanted to.
That's so interesting, and you're so right. They do harness like literally all the powerful tools to
and
be
they've
able
got
to,
I mean they've got all the capabilities as well. Like I mean, obviously I've heard from like smaller designers and independent labels that their vision for the future, they're not quite able to achieve it yet, and that's partly because the technological side and the science has not caught up with, is either not as freely available,
right, or it's not on
or
par.
it's just literally not in, it's still in the process, early stages of development, and it's not ready for them to make a viable product with. So they're making everything as sustainable as they can at the present time, and then slowly as everything catches up, that's what they're working towards to achieve the full sustainability. But with backing from big brands, and there's a lot of development going on in the materials industry, but it's kind of making those, again, it's like everything at the moment, it's still quite niche. The minute it becomes standard, the costs come down.
Right, it's so true.
And the more investment and the more big brands that get involved and start putting money in and investing in these things, the technology will speed up and improve and become more readily available. So it's ready for companies with smaller budgets to actually start using it as part of their standard range as well.
Cross collaboration, absolutely.
True. Not just with technology, even with other things like with farming organic cotton and everything. If more companies want to use organic cotton, people will start producing it even more. I think it's just a cycle. As more people keep doing it, things will become more readily available, and then more brands will continue to use it, and that'll just it's a cycle. It just goes on.
Plateau where you're currently would be, brands were thinking they're going to be paying a lot more. The more standardized it becomes, the lower that cost is to be sustainable. So I mean, again, it's about like taking a more long-term view, I think.
In conclusion, businesses as well as consumers pay a much larger price than just what's on the price tag for unsustainable products in terms of human lives, pollution, and so much more. Businesses need to view sustainability as an opportunity rather than hindrance. Ethical capitalism, which is businesses with a bigger, more meaningful purpose, is what we should aspire for.